Hello lovely people! Welcome to another media analysis video because the interest on my student loan just keeps going up and I need to put my degree to good use to feel better. If you're interested in watching similar videos, I've so far made them on autism in media, queer coding and disability inspiration porn. Then click the card in the top left of your screen to find that playlist. This time we're going to be looking at OCD on screen with the help of Rowan and Charlie Vincent, YouTubers who both have OCD and have kindly helped me with the script. I don't have OCD myself, so I am just helping to spread awareness and I'm very grateful for their input.
Hey, I'm Rowan. I make videos on YouTube about LGBTQ+ history, representation and pop culture, and I have primarily obsessional OCD.
What's going on everybody, I'm Charlie Vlogs and I'm a YouTuber with OCD. I make a variety of videos from money saving challenges to talking about current events, and I've also made a few videos about mental health and OCD.
Thank you also to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I'll be telling you more about some of their anxiety reducing classes later. I'm betting you've seen not just one, but a number of characters on screen who are portrayed as a bit OCD, or who aren't name checked as such, but just, really love to clean. No, my friends. Firstly, OCD is not an adjective, it's the name of a disorder. We don't say, wow, she is so lupus, or everyone's a bit cartilage disorder, so don't. OCD is a mental health disorder that is both debilitating and torturous. It is not fun, and it is not useful. Although, of course, always we can see positives in our situations. If I didn't have an intensely painful double sideways scoliosis, I wouldn't have such good posture. I mean, if I wasn't dyslexic, I probably would be able to spell peach, but I wouldn't be able to read so quickly. Wait, that's how you spell peach? Much better. Looking at neat and tidy spaces and wishing yours would be that way does not mean that you have OCD, because it is not just tidying and it's not fun. No matter what Khloe Kardashian says. I know that the builders are currently making a lot of noise, but also this is my one moment of energy, so I'm just like grabbing it and filming. Inaccurate media portrayals of OCD lead to these widely held misconceptions, but in actual fact, OCD is debilitating. Those with the condition who do clean generally do so in utter misery because they feel compelled to do so, not because they love to do so. OCD is more than you think, and it affects more people than you would assume. About 2% of the population. In the US, it's believed that 1 in every 40 adults suffers with the condition. According to the World Health Organization, OCD is one of the top 20 causes of illness-related disability worldwide for individuals between 15 and 44 years of age. When we think of OCD, our brains are probably likely to jump to Monica Geller from Friends, Emma Pillsbury from Glee, or Monk. But they're all just depictions of very stereotypical OCD behaviours as observed from the outside. Also, their behaviour varies wildly depending on who's writing which episode. That's neither here nor there. So what is OCD? Well, it isn't cute and it isn't quirky, as Charlie explains.
When it comes to my own personal OCD, the thing that I struggle with the most are intrusive thoughts and anxiety related to those intrusive thoughts. I've got a little bit of dirt and germophobia and sort of ordering things how I want them to, but these don't really upset me, I suppose, and they don't really stress me out. Like the raw chicken and the locked doors thoughts, I can deal with them. They're light work. But the more distressing intrusive thoughts are about my family members and loved ones being harmed, usually by me or other people. Most of the time, my brain will just come up with these fake scenarios and situations that are just never going to happen in a million years. And as you can probably imagine, coming from an internal perspective and sort of it's all coming from inside, so you think that there's something wrong with you. This can result in anxiety thought loops that can go on for genuinely hours and hours, sometimes days and weeks. The only thing I can compare it to is like being stuck in a room tied to a chair and being forced to watch a video recording with your eyes held open. That's the most accurate description I can give of it.
People with OCD experience unwanted obsessions, which take the form of persistent and uncontrollable thoughts, images, impulses, worries, fears, or doubts, or a combination of all these. They're intrusive, unwanted, and disturbing, and most importantly, significantly interfere with the sufferer's ability to function on a day-to-day basis, as they're near impossible to ignore. OCD obsessions are ego-dystonic. That means they're the opposite of a person's values and self-concept, which can obviously be very anxiety-inducing and disturbing to the sufferer. Yes, people with OCD do usually realise that their extreme obsessional thoughts are irrational, but they feel very real, and they believe that the only way to relieve the anxiety caused by their obsessions, or to stop the bad thing from happening, is to perform certain behaviours compulsively, which is where the C in OCD comes from. These behaviours include avoidance and seeking reassurance, along with things that we're more used to seeing in media, like tidying or cleaning or flicking light switches on and off. These compulsive behaviours are carried out to prevent perceived harm from happening to themselves, or more often than not, to a loved one, even if there is absolutely no correlation between their thoughts and compulsive behaviour. For example, a mother worries that her child will get hit by a car on the way to school, so she has to touch everything in her kitchen 3 times. Compulsions are time-consuming, painful, and irrational. Again, there's no joy that comes from obsessions and compulsions. You're not whistling happily as you tidy up. There is terror and dread, and your brain is repeatedly firing false alarm signals. I feel like Scrubs portrayed this particularly well. So Dr. Kevin Casey, played by Michael J. Fox, who I also mentioned, by the way, in inspiration porn video, has extreme OCD. It's beneficial in that he's practiced things over and over again until he does them perfectly, and he has compulsively memorized every medical textbook that he can. It's a show full of quirky characters, and he's just another one, starting out his first day by touching literally everything in the first patient's room while saying "bink," which is initially played for laughs, but very deliberately the episode slowly starts to show that it isn't fun. He can't enter or exit a room without timing his last step to his breath. And when the stress of trying to control how much his first day in a new environment affects him, he's left unable to stop washing his hands over and over again for hours, despite being exhausted and desperate to finish so he can go home.
So there was a character called Dr. Kevin Casey, who I think was like probably the first time that I saw OCD on screen that wasn't in one of the not so great representations that I will talk about in a bit, the reality TV type representations. And the reason why I think that his OCD on screen worked is because he was in a show called Scrubs, which was like a sitcom that married comedy and kind of slightly ridiculous scenarios and heightened humour, all that kind of stuff, with often more serious kind of cutting moments of like reality. And for me, that was kind of how the OCD was portrayed, and so it was portrayed in the same way as a lot of other things on that show were. So it kind of felt in tune with the tone of everyone else's issues that were being dealt with. So you would have kind of jokes at the expense of the OCD, but you would also have, you know, him staying for 2 hours in the scrub room after a surgery because he can't stop washing his hands. And those two things felt like they were... Let's start that sentence again, but I'm not going to restart the recording because I'm going to just be okay with not being perfect. And so, you know, we would have these jokes kind of around his OCD and his kind of compulsions, but we would also have the more serious moment of like, oh, he's actually spent 2 hours in the scrub room unable to stop washing his hands after surgery, and the real emotion that comes with that as someone who has OCD and gets stuck in that kind of compulsion cycle, for example. And so for me, that wasn't necessarily like a bastion of representation, but I did feel like it fit into the tone of that show and was portraying it in a way that was maybe a little bit more complicated than the, oh, I just get a bit irritated if my pencils are out of order sort of vibe.
I remember seeing that episode for the first time on TV and how much it's stayed with me since. It's a really powerful look into the side of the disorder that isn't much talked about, and that's a really important thing that media can do for us. But there is only so much we can understand from an outside perspective, and that, I feel, is why rituals are often believed to be the defining trait of OCD, when in reality it's actually an anxiety disorder that causes repeated unwanted thoughts. Rituals are simply attempts to stop those thoughts and may have nothing to do with order. A person suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder will be impacted on some or all aspects of their daily life, sometimes becoming severely distressed, leading to some nature of impairment or even disablement for hours at a time, each and every day. It's this level of impact on a person that makes OCD a disorder. It's worth noting also that, like most disorders, OCD exists on a spectrum, and its presentation can vary greatly from person to person and from day to day, depending on how much stress the person is dealing with. On-screen representations can also span from 1 to 2 quirky behaviours to a crippling inability to function. Either way, it's likely a disability superpower, which turns the character into a genius detective. It's usually a detective. To non-sufferers, the thoughts and fears related to OCD could often seem profoundly shocking because they can be very violent or indecent, but they are involuntary thought, not fantasies to be acted upon. And in actual fact, people living with OCD are the least likely people to actually act on such thoughts. No one told Hollywood, but we'll get to that later in our bad representation section. Interestingly, obsessional thoughts are actually quite commonplace in the general population, not just for those that suffer with OCD. Researchers working in the US, the UK and Canada have shown that up to 80% of people report unwanted, intrusive thoughts with content that is often identical to that of obsessions found in obsessive compulsive disorder. The occasional intrusive thought, no matter how disturbing or horrific, is normal for everyone. I can't be at the top of the ledge without this kind of nagging feeling that I should really jump off it. I really like the feeling of flying. I try to make Claudia go over small bridges quickly so I can just get that weightless feeling. I know, you're probably thinking that I should try roller coasters, but I have BDS and my bones aren't really attached to each other. So whenever I've been on a roller coaster that goes from side to side, it's kind of awful because I can't brace myself and instead I just smack my head repeatedly. The whiplash is just not worth it. What we learned from this is that the occasional intrusive thought, even if it's disturbing and horrific, is pretty natural, even for those without OCD. The thoughts themselves are not the problem, it's the frequency and the way that OCD makes people who have it respond to those thoughts that is the problem. This is not a Diet Coke advert. If you find that you're struggling with anxious thoughts recently, or just a generally darker mood, then I'd like to suggest something that has been working really well for Claudia and I this year. Although I'll be honest, since the 7th of November, my thoughts have really perked up, so good job making history, USA. Plant parenting! This summer, my darling wife Claudia and I, whilst living in a literal building site that is our home and being obviously very restricted by the coronavirus precautions, and quite rightly, brought many houseplants. Because we couldn't go into our garden thanks to the building site, and becoming a plant parent has just been a joy and we've loved every minute of it. Our maidenhair fern was this big when we bought it and now it's this big. Oh, they grow so fast. However, we've had a lot to learn in a very short space of time about repotting, soil types, when to water, where to position things, and exactly the type of tender loving care that each plant needs. They're all little individuals, you know. Which is why we've really been enjoying the Plants at Home, Uplift Your Spirit and Your Space course by Christopher Griffin on Skillshare Originals. Now, we all know that Skillshare is an online learning platform with videos targeted at creators covering a range of topics that spans business and finance, as well as fine art and graphic design, but it is not just about productivity. Skillshare also has courses that can help ease your anxiety and just generally enjoyable to watch. And let me tell you, Christopher, the self-titled Plant Queen, is a joy to watch. In just 10 short lessons, Christopher will entertain and educate you with their wide-ranging knowledge of houseplants, from their Brooklyn apartment that is home to over 160 plants and counting, from root rot to sunburn to learning to interpret what your plant's leaves are trying to tell you. There's a lot to be learned from this really enjoyable course. And that's really emblematic, I think, of Skillshare as a whole. Don't tell anyone, but sometimes when I'm tired, I get really worried that I'm not being productive enough, and I'm not doing enough, and I'm not learning enough. Oh, I'm not alone in that feeling? Goodness, who knew? At times like that, I'll just find a Skillshare course from someone fun, pop it on, and I just kind of sit back with a big relaxed sigh because I'm taking care of myself and resting by watching a series, but I'm also learning. It makes both the kind of devil on this shoulder and the angel on this shoulder very happy. Also, there are closed captions on all of the Skillshare originals and staff picks videos, and excellent. Personally, caring for plants has been a really effective way of just adding calm into our very fraught world, and it's been lovely to be able to learn more tips. Christopher sees plant care as a path to self-discovery because, spoiler, we all deserve to be nurtured and taken care of. As a Skillshare member, you also have the opportunity to give and receive feedback on projects through the creators community, which can be a huge help to anybody who's learning a new skill, or just, improving on an old one. Christopher's course and online presence in general really centres on building a community through a love of plants, and it's just lovely to see. If you feel like you need to fuel your curiosity, creatively, or even career, or you just want some really relaxing yet educational videos to watch, then join the 7 million plus people currently using their site to further improve their skills. With premium membership comes the benefit of unlimited access to all courses on their website, meaning you can find the course and the community that works best for you, and because they're great. Skillshare are offering my subscribers a special free discount when you click the link in my description, and after that it's only around $10 a month. Highly recommended. Another recommendation of mine would be that if you want to get a really good look at how OCD makes your mind behave in ways that are not just putting away pencils in a straight line, that you read Mara Wilson's Where Am I Now?, which I found really, really helpful in better understanding of the condition. So she explains her thought patterns and spiraling anxieties incredibly well, especially since she develops the disorder while she's still a child, so she doesn't have a broader knowledge of what a normal way of thinking is. Also, yes, she's the girl who played Matilda, but she's so much more than that. I love her book and I want to show it to you, but I lent it to Clara and now I can't find it. So, Clara, if you still have it, let me know. Types of obsessive fears. These can include, but are not limited to, contamination from dirt, germs, and viruses, for example, HIV, bodily fluids or feces, chemicals, sticky substances, dangerous materials, for example, asbestos. Fear of harm, excessive concern with order or symmetry, obsessions with the body or physical symptoms, religious, sacrilegious, or blasphemous thoughts, sexual thoughts, for example, being a paedophile or a homosexual when you're not. This list is taken from the 2005 National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence Guidelines for the treatment of OCD and BDD. As I mentioned earlier, OCD intrusive thoughts are ego-dystonic, which means they don't align with your values. What if I take this knife and stab my wife? What if I kill my dog? What if I'm actually racist? This can make it terrifying to tell someone and get help, because what if they take you seriously? What if they confuse your worst fears with your legitimate values or intentions?
I've definitely never seen OCD portrayed on screen which portrays the kind of OCD where people have intrusive thoughts of violence or hurting themselves or others or anything like that. And I think in part because it maybe feels difficult to make a sympathetic character who is thinking those thoughts, or you veer the other way and make someone who is portrayed as such a victim who doesn't necessarily have any agency, that it just becomes a recipe for sympathy bait. I don't really know what to call it, but the idea of we're going to create this character just for people who don't have OCD to feel really sorry for them, and I also don't think that's the answer.
Attempting to deal with obsessions then leads to compulsions. If you're affected by obsessive compulsive disorder, your response, understandably, is to fight the unwanted and anxiety-provoking intrusive thoughts, purposeful behaviours and deliberate actions. These are called compulsions, and they're the part of OCD that we can see from the outside. So that's why we tend to think of compulsive behaviour first and believe that that's the root of the obsessions rather than the other way around.
I also think one of the things about representation of OCD, which is often lacking for me, is the internal stuff, is the compulsions, which then, the obsessions. I know my own disorder. I also think with OCD specifically, one of the things that's really been lacking is an understanding of it as a full disorder. So there's often been, as I said before, these very specific visuals of OCD, of the compulsions, and I think that not enough is talked about with the obsession side or with what's going on internally and why these compulsions happen.
Take Rabbit from Winnie the Pooh. We see his obsession with keeping things clean, tidy and in place, and if someone, usually Tigger, disrupts that, he does get very upset. All we're seeing are the outside issues, but not the cause of his compulsive behaviour. Side note, yes, I moved all of my filming equipment downstairs because the builder smashed the studio ceiling and water started dripping on my lights. So side notes aren't really to the side anymore. That's not the side note I wanted. Popular theory holds that the characters in Winnie the Pooh stories each represent a different mental disorder. So Pooh is impulsivity, Piglet's anxiety, Roo is autism, Kanga is social anxiety, Owl is dyslexia, Tigger is ADHD, Eeyore is depression, and Rabbit is OCD. But that's not how they were written by the author, that's just us reading into it. I think it's quite a nice way though to bring up mental health with your children. Yes, your cousin Tommy does have a lot of energy, but that's because he has ADHD, like Tigger, and you'd play with Tigger, so stop excluding cousin Tommy. I do know that ADHD is not just having a lot of energy, but I'm yelling at a 10-year-old here, so I'm kidding. I don't yell. Most often, the principal aim behind compulsive behaviour is to generate relief, usually only temporary, from the anxiety elicited by the preceding obsession. Compulsions are carried out repeatedly in a very rigid and structured routine, with a view to prevent perceived danger or harm coming to oneself or to a loved one. This means that a person living with OCD will often feel a heightened sense of responsibility to perform the neutralising behaviours. For example, a common and very well-known stereotypical perspective and OCD compulsion is someone who washes his or her hands because of an obsessive fear of contamination. People without the illness wash our hands when we see that they are dirty, or it's 2020. In contrast, someone with OCD whose obsessions are focused on contamination fears will often feel that their hands are dirty and therefore keep washing until they feel clean, and their OCD will convince them that doing such a ritual keeps their loved ones safe by not contaminating them. It's this heightened sense of responsibility and need to protect loved ones that often drives the person with OCD to repeat the endless cycle of compulsions. It's worth noting that compulsions can either be overt, i.e. observable to others, or covert, such as repeating a specific phrase in their mind or counting breaths. There's also a form of OCD that sufferers refer to as pure O, which means they have intrusive thoughts but not compulsions. George in Seinfeld kind of shows some signs of this. In the episode The Note, he begins to obsessively fear he is secretly gay, secret even from himself, after receiving a massage from a male masseuse. Jerry also shows kind of broader signs with just a dislike for germs that borders on pathological. Elaine even warns him that his odd tendencies could become OCD if he isn't careful and doesn't get any help. In one episode, he's faced with more germs than usual, and it does push him over the edge temporarily. Let's move on to things people with OCD are not. Vampires. Yeah. Really. According to ancient legends, vampires have a compulsion to count, and thus scattering grain is a good way to stop a vampire, as they will be compelled to just kind of stare at it and count it, which gives the victim time to escape. It's been used in such varied works as The X-Files, when Mulder defeated a vampire by spilling his sunflower seeds, and Dracula 2, Ascension, where, it doesn't really work because the kids just throw the seeds and then Dracula slows down time so he can count them before they hit the floor. The best known modern vampire with this feature is Sesame Street's The Count, but apparently that was just some kind of an accident and they didn't know that vampires count stuff. Okay. OCD is also not obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Whilst OCD is an anxiety disorder with compulsions and behaviours that alleviate anxiety from unwanted or intrusive thoughts, OCPD is a personality disorder. So a person with OCPD is globally meticulous and nitpicky, desiring order in every aspect of their life, and they don't suffer distress from being aware that their behaviour is irrational, as someone with OCD does. Someone with OCPD just doesn't really suffer distress from their behaviour and views it as the best way of doing things. Distress with OCPD comes from someone else screwing with their system, not from their behaviour itself, although there's nothing to prevent someone from having both OCD and OCPD at the same time, so they may indeed have those feelings. But, however, OCPD is quite rare. Probably a pretty well-known example of this would be Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. And I know, I mentioned him in my video on autism and media, but there's actually a really big overlap between people with autism and those with ADHD. Also, the writers haven't explicitly said that he is one way or the other, so let's armchair diagnose a fictional character. The only type of armchair diagnosis that is acceptable. Sheldon has many repetitive compulsions within his life. He always has to knock on Penny's door 3 times, saying her name after each knock. Anytime Penny messes up his rhythm by opening the door before he's finished or interrupting him, he feels that it's just wrong. He also has a favourite cushion on the sofa that is his spot, and when it became stained, he spent the time in which the cushion was being cleaned slowly losing his mind, eventually crouching over the spot where he used to sit. He also throws out food when it isn't logically ordered or sized, including one occasion where he throws away prawns because they're all the same size and that doesn't give him a logical order to eat them in. Which gives a good visualization, really, of the fact that OCD is actually miserable. Bad representation. Again, organisation is not fun. I mean, I find it fun, but it's not fun if you have OCD. It's a vicious cycle, and whilst compulsions relieve the anxiety momentarily, the thoughts always come back worse. And hiding OCD in public is very difficult, especially when the compulsions are overt, like tapping or blinking. And it doesn't just make you a super cute and useful detective. I mean, as much as I love Hercule Poirot, he's not it. His little moustache is so cute, though. Poirot is the star of 33 books and 56 short stories by Agatha Christie, and one of the most famous fictional detectives in the world. He's also exceptionally conceited, so he's probably not surprised by that. Originally a Belgian police detective, he became a refugee when World War I broke out and ended up in a tiny English village of Styles St Mary. Naturally, whilst he was there, someone was murdered, which is, it's quite a common occurrence around him, so don't go to tea with him. I'm a pretty big Poirot fan, I have to admit, and I still wouldn't go to tea with him. I value my life too much. In my eyes, I think Poirot probably has more OCPD, but I'm not a doctor. He wants everything orderly and he frequently complains that eggs won't form neat little cubes. In the book, his fastidious nature, his kind of clever scheming, love of personal comfort, perception of fine details and green eyes have all led to him being compared to a cat, because he notices everything that's out of order. In some books, it's handled more of a quirk of personality, although it does sometimes trip him up. In the TV show, it's definitely slightly more like a disability, and there are some occasions where he's stopped from doing things he wants to do due to his obsession with symmetry and order. But generally, it's portrayed as just really cute. He's quirky.
There's also a type of representation that I don't necessarily see as good or bad, because it's not really representation at all. It's characters that are like read as having OCD because of particular traits that they hold, but it's not explicit in the text itself. And this again is like something that happens with most representations. We have people who are like queer coded that we might read as being LGBT within a narrative. I know that obviously last one of these videos Jessica talked about autism tropes in media. Really interestingly, there is a particular element of both OCD representation and autism representation that kind of has this crossover that means that there's a few characters who kind of are read as either and or autistic or having OCD. So for example, like Monica from Friends or Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory, with the idea of, you know, a character who likes things a certain way, who is quite into things being very organized or having a particular routine, which can be read as both. And I think that it can just be useful from the point of view of a viewer who just want to see themselves, to have these characters that they identify with. I think that works, but I also think that the people who are actually writing the characters need to do more to like explicitly create representation rather than just rely on people to like find a sense of belonging or find a character they relate to where the writers didn't necessarily mean to write them that way.
Monica Geller from Friends can tell if the furniture has been moved even an inch and will have a near panic attack at the thought of it, but how bad that was kind of fluctuated based on the writer of the episode. In one episode, Chandler cleaned the apartment to make Monica happy, and when Monica came home, she did notice that things were moved, but she thought that the gesture was sweet and didn't mind it at all. So you can stop saying she's so OCD now. Please, stop it now. Equally, Bree from Desperate Housewives definitely was portrayed as having the disorder at the start of the series because she's in deep distress when things are out of place. But we're not supposed to sympathise with her, we're supposed to find it weird and laugh, even though we see how it kind of destroys her relationships. She magically starts to get better as the series goes along though, and by the end just like tells people off for not using a coaster. Glee also leaned into the OCD is kooky and weird kind of group with their character Emma Pillsbury, who was such a severe misophobe, that means she has a fear of germs, that she cleaned every grape individually before eating it. At the same time though, they kind of just played her off as a neat freak who we can giggle at for spending an hour cleaning a pencil sharpener. We, the audience, weren't necessarily intended to sympathise with why she was doing those things or see the distress. We're kind of just meant to be amused at the start. However, the depiction of OCD on the show did get better as it went on, although it still wasn't perfect. She was shown to have anxiety and panic attacks, along with ritualistically rubbing hand lotion into her hands whilst counting, and she eventually does seek help. So yay. OCD is exhausting. Obsessions, compulsions, and hiding them for the fear of judgment sounds exceptionally exhausting. Since it's hard for people to open up about OCD symptoms, some people go for decades undiagnosed, and that can then lead to depression. Since when you're not able to access help, you can spend all day obsessing and compulsing. Mental illness is hard, and it is made worse by an inability to speak up, which is fed into by the stigma that media creates. Imagine opening up to someone that you think you might have OCD, only to hear back, "We're all a bit OCD sometimes. That's why Monica's my favourite friend." Say what now?
As well as people saying phrases like, "Oh yeah, I'm a bit OCD. Oh yeah, I'm a little bit OCD about that." It's like, no, you're not. You're not a little bit obsessive compulsive. You're just a little bit tidier than the normal person. Saying phrases like that could lead a lot of people to worry about their own OCD and maybe think that they're overthinking it, or maybe thinking that they don't actually have OCD when they do, and they need to be treated as such. Because if somebody doesn't think they have OCD, but they do, you can imagine the stress and anxiety going through their brain because they're thinking, "Oh my god, I'm a freak, I'm a weirdo, and I need to be sectioned or something." You know what I mean?
Monk. Yes, there's an entire section of this video specifically about the show Monk, seeing as how it's pretty controversial, even amongst those with OCD. As in, some people like it and some don't. Monk is a detective drama that aired on USA Network from 2002 to 2009. It follows Adrian Monk, a former San Francisco police inspector who suffered a nervous breakdown after the murder of his wife Trudy. As a lifelong sufferer of OCD, his phobias and obsessions became crippling after his breakdown, forcing his retirement. But he is frequently called in to consult on cases which baffle the police, as his OCD was the reason Monk was such a successful policeman. One of his compulsions is paying amazing attention to details. He recovers throughout the series, though he's never fully cured. His disorder is integral to his unique mind and ability to solve cases, but it really restricts his life so much that he has a carer, former nurse Sharona, with him at all times until she gets switched for a new nurse, Natalie, who accidentally fatally stabbed a man in her house and really needs Monk to solve the case of why he was even there. Of course, the one case that Monk's been trying to solve for years is his wife Trudy's murder, and each season of the show kind of brings him a little closer to finally unravelling the mystery behind her death, with the show's final season then bringing the case to a close for good. Monk is a really interesting show. For once, we're just kind of not seeing that cocky detective who's sure he knows everything or else will deduce the answer, and the bad guys who are on the back foot. Instead, because Monk inevitably looks very uncomfortable at all times, the suspect is generally pretty confident that he's going to get away with everything, and that's pretty much what makes the comedy element. Because no one ever explains to the people being questioned why Monk acts in a certain way, which is, I guess we're meant to laugh at the things he does most of the time. However, he is also portrayed sympathetically, and I guess we're also laughing at people who are laughing at him. It's a thing. Unlike Poirot, Monk does not enjoy his ability to notice everything. OCD is portrayed as a seriously debilitating illness, just also happens to be funny. There's always humour in life, I guess. Some sufferers of the condition therefore see it as an insult to those who truly endure this serious mental illness. The show largely ignores the obsession part of OCD, and Monk's compulsions consist of only the most stereotypical, which are then punchlines. He is in essence this kind of an eccentric, reclusive invalid, and the show does nothing to say that he is not representative of the entire group of people suffering with this disorder, many of whom are very normal humans. We can argue that the show's jokes come at the expense of Monk's personality being coupled with his OCD, and thus we're laughing at Adrian Monk specifically and not OCD sufferers in general. But still, viewers are led to believe that OCD is both, and this is a direct quote from Monk himself, a gift and a curse. In one episode, Monk's doctor finds a medication that helps him to tone down his OCD considerably, but is at the expense of his attention to detail, so he stops taking it. So, did his superpower come from... There are so few representations of OCD in the media that understandably, most people's understanding of the disorder comes from shows like Monk. And I make this argument in pretty much every media video that I make, but if there was a wider representation of the condition than this one case of not great, it would be fine. If there are characters in every show who do a range of roles and have different types of personalities whilst just happening to be gay, and I mean contented gay, not partner's just been murdered gay, then fine, have that one effeminate gay villain. He's yours. That would allow viewers who do not come into contact with anyone who has the condition to accurately distinguish between fact and embellishment. I know, it's a detective show, it's not meant to be educational, it's just for fun. It also does a great job of painting people who make fun of or refuse to try and understand Monk's disorder as the bad guys. So that's why it doesn't make its way to bad representation, the psychopath. I know I throw that word around too much when it comes to fictional characters, and I'm working on it, but I really do mean here that this is how we're meant to be perceiving the character.
So I made a video a few years ago around mental illness and horror movies, essentially the way in which we seem to equate mental illness as like automatically making someone a serial killer or, an axe murderer, and how that can be really difficult and damaging for people with mental illnesses. And I think that essentially is like the very like extreme end of bad representation, where it's like actively promoting harmful stereotypes about people.
Obvious example, Patrick Bateman from American Psychopath. He has a precise morning routine that he sticks to and won't abide by even the smallest smudge on his mirror. Also, Batman villain the Riddler, who is incapable of not committing a crime and leaving a note, even once saying, "You don't understand. I really didn't want to leave you any clues. I really planned never to go back to Arkham Asylum, but I left you a clue anyway. So I have to go back there because I might need help. I might actually be crazy." Also Hannibal Lecter in Hannibal, who frequently arranges things in a way that just exacerbates his creepiness. And he eats people, tidily. We can kind of semi-throw in characters like Jack Nicholson in As Good As It Gets. Do you find that you also refer to every character Jack Nicholson plays as Jack Nicholson? He has several common OCD fixations, like being unable to walk on the lines between paving stones and only using disposable forks, even in restaurants. He's just a bigot who uses his compulsions to be a general arsehole to everyone around him, just because. Bad representations can also be non-scripted.
But I also think there's, bad representation which is either like ill-informed or spreads misinformation, not necessarily maliciously, and it's not even misinformation which makes people look particularly bad, it's just wrong information. And then you have the ones like stuff that's in reality TV, which is more kind of exploitative to individuals, as well as having that potential misinformation, or at least not necessarily giving someone all the information to like fully understand OCD as a disorder. So one of the reasons why this misinformation can be quite harmful and damaging is, like for me, for example, I had the symptoms of OCD from when I was a kid, from when I was really little, and as I grew up, I didn't realise that was what I had. I didn't realise what was going on, because that was never something that was portrayed as anything to do with OCD, like intrusive thoughts, for example, were just not, I never really saw them mentioned anywhere, unless it was like someone was hallucinating, or they were having visions, or, it was something supernatural in a horror movie. But it definitely wasn't in portrayals of OCD, and it wasn't until I started to explore and like research myself that I managed to come to that conclusion when I was a teenager. And I know that if I had had those kind of portrayals, I way earlier would have understood what was happening to me, and it wouldn't have been so kind of isolating and anxiety inducing to try and like figure out what was going on inside my brain.
But let's move on to good representation.
So I don't know if I've just been looking in the wrong places, but I don't necessarily think I've ever seen a actively good representation of OCD on screen. And I've definitely never seen a representation of OCD which feels like it represents the particular sub-diagnosis I have in my experiences.
So the only accurate portrayal that I've ever seen in any form of film or programme is from a series called Pure. It was a series made in the UK, I think Channel 4 made it, and basically it's about a girl who has some really intrusive, violent, sexual, extreme thoughts. And throughout the series, these thoughts just cause her a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, because of course she just doesn't have any idea why she's having them or where they stemmed from. She eventually has to come to terms with her thoughts and actually open up about them, and she eventually has to come to terms with her thoughts and She then eventually has to come to terms with her thoughts and open up about them. And let me tell you, from somebody who suffers with OCD, telling people your most intrusive and deepest, darkest thoughts can be quite overwhelming, and to be honest, I can count the number of people on one hand, not even one hand, one finger that I've told about my deepest, darkest thoughts. When you have OCD and you don't really understand the thoughts yourself, externalizing them can just be really, really anxiety inducing. I think the best thing about this program is it gives a real accurate description on what pure OCD is like and what OCD can be like, instead of just including the clean freak character who loves to clean and loves to keep everything tidy. It's like, not everybody with OCD has those thoughts.
Season 2 of The Hour, which, by the way, I loved, it's a BBC drama series centred on a new current affairs show being launched by the BBC in June 1956, at the time of the Suez Crisis, written by Abby Morgan, who also wrote Suffragette, The Iron Lady and The Split, which my wife and I are kind of pretty obsessed with. It stars Ben Whishaw, Dominic West, Romola Garai, Anna Chancellor and Una Chaplin. I probably murdered some of those names. Belle Rowley is the producer of the show within a show. Her friend Freddie Lyon, played by Whishaw, loses the presenter interview to well-spoken Eton boy Hector Madden, played by West, but she persuades him to stay on as a researcher. Meanwhile, Freddie is suspicious about the reported suicide of an old friend, and when he starts to notice shadowy men following him around, it only confirms his suspicions. It's great. You should watch it. Not why I'm mentioning it now. Season 2 introduces Randall Brown, the new head of news. He's like a witty, forward-thinking maverick. Clearly has many symptoms of OCD, which don't stop him from being a good boss, even if the others consider him a little eccentric. He's authoritative and effective, has had relationships in the past, and his disorder's not played for laughs, even if it does sometimes trip him up. In fact, it's just this kind of gentle undertone that doesn't cause drama, and we kind of think likely won't be addressed until a, spoiler, thing happens that sends him into a compulsion cycle that is pretty darn heartbreaking to watch. I mean, it's nice that his disorder isn't played for laughs, and also that it doesn't stop him from being a good boss. Can we have The Aviator? I mean, biopic of Howard Hughes, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his struggle with advancing OCD, but it kind of also makes him seem like his OCD is what creates his genius. The film has the familiar notes of task repetition, cleanliness, isolation, and arseholeness. That's in every media portrayal of OCD for some reason. But he capitalizes on those traits to become a famous billionaire. His manic attention to detail allows him to win Oscars, figure out the maths of a corporate takeover in minutes, know his airplanes down to the inch, and keep meticulous records to use when winning a fight with the US Senate. And he's also an awful boyfriend and a terrible friend, and to be fair, the film actually finishes in the late 40s, right before Hughes enters his darkest phase, including becoming a hermit. So, yay, OCD? I mean, some critics have noted that this film is a movie about Hughes, as he might have made a movie about himself, so... Okay, fine. Maybe there just aren't that many good representations of people with OCD on screen, and I'm just kind of grasping wildly at straws, because at least this one became rich. A lack of representation does impact wider awareness of conditions like OCD, and that can make life harder for those who suffer from it.
And I'm sure that portrayal of OCD in films and media and TV is probably what is causing so many people to be ignorant around OCD. Ask 100 people what OCD is, and I guarantee 95 of them will say, oh yeah, it's just being clean and being tidy and just making sure everything's in order. And it's like, yeah, that's accurate for some people, but a lot of other people are suffering with different types of it as well. And although people have said to me in the past, oh what, you've got OCD? Nah, you can't do. Your room's too messy to have OCD. Like, that doesn't affect me. That doesn't get me down and make me feel upset, but it could to other people. For somebody who doesn't have the clean and tidy aspect of OCD, they might feel quite invalidated, do you know what I mean?
But what would good representation even look like if it existed?
When it comes to good representation, I think there's a few elements, but I think one of the most important ones is just having more authentic representation, right? So not everyone is going to experience OCD in the same way. In fact, most people will experience it totally differently to each other, and that might be because of the different type of OCD they have, but it also might be their personality, their environment, who they have around them, their other identities and how that intersects, where they live, like so many things can affect it. And so I think that with one representation, you are never going to authentically show everyone's experience of OCD. It's just not going to happen, right? And so I think the more that we have, that's not just having more of it, but having it be authentic, having it be informed by people who actually have OCD and not just people who have like maybe read about it somewhere, or worse, watched other portrayals of OCD which themselves are not authentic. I think that having good representation relies on having lots of different representations in different genres and with different experiences. I think that's kind of the cornerstone of it. So as with a lot of mental illnesses or experiences or identities, I think that some of the most like authentic representation can be seen in reality, right? It can be seen in a reality in which people have control over their own narrative. So on YouTube, people who talk about their mental illnesses on YouTube can be a really good source of people kind of understanding what it's like to live with something day to day, in a way that even factual documentaries might not always be able to capture, because obviously with documentaries you are relying on the documentarian, who is often outside of the experience themselves, to accurately portray an experience of people that they are seeing as subjects, who they need to get enough out of to feel like a worthwhile documentary, enough drama, enough narrative, might have their own agenda of some kind, even if they're not necessarily consciously aware of it, might come with their own biases or prejudices about the disorder, or their own opinions about it, their own agenda. So I think YouTube and blogs and people's like online expressions that doesn't have a gatekeeper, that allows people to maybe more freely express how they're feeling, is a really interesting window through which we might view authentic experiences and representation of people with OCD, because they are literally a person with OCD representing themselves. And although I think that because of the stigma and the taboo around things like intrusive thoughts or compulsions, or, you know, all of this stuff that's wrapped around mental illness and OCD especially, means that people might not feel as confident to entirely expose themselves and their experiences online. When people do, that can be a really, really powerful thing.
Based on current estimates for the UK population, there are around 750,000 people living with OCD at any one time. However, a disproportionately high number of those, about 50% of those cases, fall into the severe category, with less than a quarter being classed as mild cases. Sufferers used to go undiagnosed for many years, partly because of a lack of understanding of the condition, but also partly because people went to great lengths to hide their symptoms due to the intense feeling of embarrassment, guilt, and sometimes even shame. Remember, these obsessive thoughts are generally not things the sufferer will believe in, but rather things they hugely disagree with. Generally, OCD starts to impact on a person's life during late adolescence for men and during the early 20s for women, although onset can affect a wide range of ages, with some developing the disorder as young as 6. OCD will impact on individuals regardless of gender, of social or cultural background. If you find that you're struggling with intrusive thoughts you can't control, and compulsions that you just can't get a handle on, and believe you might have obsessive compulsive disorder, then it's vital to speak to someone and to get some help in order to stop your symptoms from getting worse. You are not alone, and you're going to be okay. There are many people who live with this condition and still have wonderful, meaningful lives. Don't panic that just because characters on TV or in films have similar symptoms that you will inevitably end up falling into their pitfalls as well. You're not necessarily going to end up like Monk, obsessively noticing everything and in need of a nurse to follow you around. Although, so what if you do? I have a carer with me pretty much all the time, and I'm amazing. It's important to realise that some degree of OCD type symptoms are probably experienced at one time or another by most people, especially in times of stress. And this is a pretty darn stressful year. However, the phrase, everybody's a little bit OCD, is deeply unhelpful. OCD can have a devastating and distressing impact on a person's entire life, from education, work and career enhancement to social life and personal relationships. I've linked some organisations down in the description and in a pinned comment that might be able to help you. If anyone else has others, then please do comment on that comment and I will add them to the original one. I've also linked all of Charlie and Rowan's social media profiles. Go follow them everywhere. Thank you to both of them for contributing to this video and for helping me with the script. And finally, thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Remember to click their link in my description and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye!